Tyra would find whatever person's trauma is and turn that into a themed photo shoot. Were there any photo shoots that you had that sort of tested your comfort level?
I do think that they used our stories and vulnerability to weaponize and to kind of watch us kind of squirm, as they say. Going back, there was a couple shoots that made me highly uncomfortable. One was the underwater shoot. I was like, what are we doing here? I'm a Florida girl, but my goodness, Another shoot I thought was absolutely ridiculous was the
Hello and welcome to Obsessed the Podcast. I'm Matt Wilstein from The Daily Beast, and I am joined today by my good friend and Substack extraordinaire, Kevin Fallon. How's it going, Kevin?
Hi, Matt. Thanks for that intro.
Yeah, well, we are here today to talk about America's Next Top Model because you have one of the original winners, season 2 winner, Yoanna, as our guest on the podcast today, right?
I do. I'm very excited because I like so many people, so many millennials, was obsessed with the show when I was younger. It premiered, I believe, like 23 years ago. And I remember, obviously, back then, you turned on the TV, you didn't know necessarily what you were going to watch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There wasn't like a streaming service where you're picking out what you want to watch each night.
We were just watching whatever was on.
Exactly. And I remember distinctly during the first season of Top Model, just coming upon it because I happened to be home that night and I needed to put something on the television. And I became a weekly viewer of it. And then they did this amazing thing where VH1 would play like 40 hours in a row, Top Model, just like these extreme marathon sessions. And I would just not leave my house for days at a time because I'm so invested in watching this show. So it's been really interesting now that 2 decades later, there's now been 2 different documentary series that are sort of bringing up all of these really problematic and upsetting things that happened on the show that now as viewers, we're sort of having to grapple with. And I'm really interested to talk to Yoanna about how she feels about all these things that are bubbling up to the surface now.
Yeah, so I think everybody is talking about this show right now, and especially because of this Netflix documentary Reality Check, which I know I just kept seeing at the very top at the #1 slot every time I open Netflix for several weeks, I feel like. And yeah, so it's gotten so much attention, and I think a lot of that attention has been on the host of the show, Tyra Banks, and sort of her behavior on the show and a lot of the scandals and controversies. So I thought maybe before you get into your interview, can you just kind of explain to the novice, like say me, why what is the big scandal, what's the big controversy that everyone's been talking about around this show?
So yeah, both Reality Check on Netflix, which just premiered, and now we're getting a second version, which is Dirty Rotten Scandals on E, and that's what I'm talking to Anna about. So we now have these like dual docu-series that's really going into all these scandals. It's one of those things where I remember watching the show and just being, sort of like titillated and excited by all the ridiculous things they were doing. And now looking back, I and a lot of people have had this realization of, oh crap, like that was really bad what they did. There were examples of photo shoots where people did blackface. They had a whole episode where the contestants had to swap ethnicities. And so you had white girls putting on blackface. It's not like this was decades and decades ago. This was 20 years ago. Like, that's not, in the grand scheme of things, long enough in the past for that to be excusable.
Was this even the 90s? This was after the 90s.
It premiered in 2003, I believe. So we were,
Yeah.
I think, past the point where that was excusable.
Well past, yeah. Someone thought that was a good idea, though. I don't understand.
It's
Yeah.
boggles my mind now. There was another photo shoot where the women basically had to pose as victims of violent crimes, but like make it fashion and pretty, which was horrible to watch in and of itself. But then there was one contestant in particular who had told producers in her application that her mother was paralyzed because she was a victim of gun violence. And they made her, during that photo shoot, pose while there was like a fake bullet hole in her head. So they had forced her to relive her trauma in this photo shoot, which is just bonkers to me. And that, in a way that like makes me both admire but also be very alarmed at how the internet can turn everything into sort of a joke, that has now become a meme on TikTok and on Instagram Reels,
Okay.
where
Of course.
people will talk about like the feeling when you just told Tyra Banks that you have sleep apnea, and then there's a music cue to the theme song, and then there's a person posing with their CPAP machine.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Or like you just told Tyra you're allergic to cats, and then there's a music cue, and then the person's suddenly posing with this like harem of feral cats. So the idea was that the producers were sort of exploiting the worst parts of these women's lives for the drama of the show. And that goes to not just these human photo shoots. It goes to the way that there were women who, there was one woman who had alopecia and was really insecure about, her bald head. And they traumatized her with that in every episode.
Yeah.
If anyone was even slightly self-conscious about their weight, that their weight was brought up like every single time that those cameras were rolling. It was that kind of stuff where they're really exploiting these young women who showed up in that show with really nothing but a dream, and those dreams were being manipulated to traumatize them.
Yeah, I mean, it basically seems like this was the most problematic reality show of the reality show era. And now I'm wondering, because there's so much interest in this show, you got to think somebody's thinking, how can we bring America's Next Top Model back as a reboot? Because they bring back everything. So do you think that that could happen? Do you think it will happen? Do you think it would be a different show now?
Well, that's the really upsetting thing about how the Netflix documentary ends, which is that, we spend hours with Tyra being presented with all these horrible things that she was a part of on the show, that she was the producer for. She can't absolve herself. She was the producer of the show. And she just kept saying things like, back then those things didn't matter, where we were less woke back then, where everyone back then thought that way. She was very quick to not justify, but just completely excuse and dismiss and dodge accountability. So then at the end of these episodes, she makes this grand announcement that she's bringing the show back for another cycle.
Okay. I knew it.
So the whole thing aired as this commercial for a new season, and she took zero accountability for any of the things that were wrong from the past. It was infuriating.
What do you think the new version of the show will look like?
I mean, I am interested because, like I said, whether or not I'm proud of it, I was engrossed in all of the messiness that the show was. So I'm having a hard time imagining what it could be like with more sensitivity and with more responsibility. Because is it really that interesting to just watch pretty girls take pretty photos? Like, the fact of the matter is, for better or for worse, the entertainment value came from all of that horribleness that we were just talking about. And I certainly don't want that to happen again. I don't want this show to come back and for it to revert to this very disturbing pattern that it had back when it was first airing. But I am struggling to think of what it could be like with all that we know now, and if that will still be entertaining.
Yeah, there is this sort of movement, I feel like, in recent years of the uplifting reality competition show. Something like of Top Chef became very uplifting, where it was used to be kind of like the contestants sniping at each other, and now everyone's very nice to each other. And I think Queer Eye, even though there's a lot of drama behind the scenes of that show, had a very like uplifting thing too. But I don't even know if that could work on a show like this.
And the other interesting thing is that while there's still so many reality TV competitions right now, it's very rare, if not non-existent, for there to be a star that comes out of it. Like, people who are winning The Voice and like winning, something like a rebooted America's Next Top Model, they're not becoming superstars the way that the way that the experiment is supposed to be birthing huge stars. And instead, these people are winning. They might get a nice cash prize, and then they're off to oblivion again.
Yeah, they're not becoming Kelly Clarkson.
Exactly. So I don't even know like what would feel worth it to an aspiring model to be a part of the show when
and to go through that much trauma.
Exactly. To face the wrath of Tyra Banks, who, man, I can't remember the last time I saw there be such this tidal wave of ill will pointed towards one celebrity. Like, by just doing this documentary, she has completely tanked any goodwill and any positive reputation that she had.
Yeah, well, she's gonna have to work hard to get it back on the reboot.
Yeah. And stop distracting herself with, I kid you not, her new thing that she's calling her legacy, which is hot ice cream. I don't know how much you pay attention to the world of Tyra Banks, but she is
No, I don't know about hot ice cream.
currently living in Australia, where she has an ice cream shop that specializes on the proprietary recipe of hot ice cream that she has developed. She does occasional pop-ups in different cities, like she did one in New York recently. But she has abandoned everything else about her career and her celebrity to go all in on this idea of hot ice cream. It is so bizarre to me.
Did you get to try the hot ice cream in New York?
I didn't, and the reason why I didn't go, I was invited, but I had heard through the grapevine that it was in fact terrible. And I was like, I'm not gonna go wait in line for this bizarre sounding thing in the first place, and the first time it even tastes good. So I saved myself from that.
Well, you all heard it here first. Hot ice cream is terrible.
That's the breaking news.
I know that we want to get to your interview with Yoanna, but I do have to get one thing off my chest. I have to say this for the record. You and Joanna were so wrong about The Pit season 2 being terrible. I just listened to the most recent episode of this podcast that you guys did, and I just wanted to put that, that everyone knows where I stand on this issue, which is that The Pit is still great.
We can agree to disagree on that. I think it's so boring in the season. This is my thing that I want people to know. I'm not one of those critics who delights in picking apart a show or a movie.
No, I know you're not.
I'm a person, I want to like something because I'm watching it. I want it to be good. So when something is, to me, disappointing in the way that The Pit has been disappointing to me, it is actually something that breaks my heart.
Well, it's still totally unmissable for me every week. I still somehow almost cry at every episode. So, if you're out there wondering if you should check out season 2, don't just take Joanna and Kevin's word for it. I'm here to say it's not as bad as they're making it out to be. But anyway, yeah, I think we should get to the interview now.
Yeah, I'm very excited. Hello, Yoanna. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, Kevin?
I'm great. This is a kick. This is really taking me back. I was obsessed with your season. It was one of those times when they were doing a marathon of each one of every episode in a row. And I swear I didn't see sunlight for a full day because I
Oh
was
my gosh.
watching to make sure I saw all the way up to the end. This was so much fun for me to chat with you. It's so much nostalgia.
I know. Can you believe it was 20 years ago?
I know it pains me to hear that number. It really does. I can't believe it.
I know. We're moving on.
I know. So I was, as obsessed as I was with the show, I've been eating up these episodes of Dirty Rotten Scandal. I'm so curious, what the conversation was like when they approached you and what thoughts you had about participating in this. How did you get involved and sort of get psyched up to talk about all these things from the past?
Well, I think it was a bit of a challenge initially because I never really talked about my experience on America's Next Top Model. And it was kind of something that I'd always guarded. I even think people who were my friends, I never even brought it up, but they never asked questions. So when I was approached, I think I did a lot of research in regards to the production company that was involved. And I saw the integrity of their work. And I looked over a lot of the shows that they had done. And I felt it was a good platform. I did hear about the Netflix documentary. But I felt with the questions that I had asked the executive producers at the Glass Entertainment, I said, what's the platform going to be? And they said, we're going to shine heavily on the contestants. So that's primarily why I decided to do the this particular documentary. And I did feel a good synergy with the intro calls. And I felt that it was a good synergy with the other producers. And I felt that they were really trying to navigate this very difficult kind of conversation in regards to what the experience was really like. And I didn't feel like it was targeted. I didn't feel it was something that was going to be ultra negative. So I decided, let's go ahead and just tell my story.
Yeah. And you said that you hadn't really talked a lot about your experience and regarding it.
Mm-mm.
What were you guarding? What was the experience that you felt that you weren't ready yet to talk about?
I feel there's a lot of sensationalism with the platform of America's Next Top Model, and I really try to get away from it right after I had won. And I think the challenge for me is that I wasn't really looking at the time to be a celebrity or to pivot and to have the risk of going back on reality TV. So I felt like a big part of guarding that because I wanted to really work in the fashion industry. I wanted to grow in fashion journalism. And there was just so much of this conversation going around, pivoting into becoming some sort of reality star. And that's not what I wanted to do. So I also feel too, because there are so many seasons and there were other winners, after I had won. However, whatever formula ever, I guess every season had a different formula for the winner. And I didn't want to open that door to have any sort of confrontational conversations with social media and past winners and their experiences. I just had to be true and really just identify with my narrative. And that was something that I think I just needed time to kind of, come to grips with and just be ready to share. And also I'm in a different mind frame, a different age. And I feel like I can kind of handle my own a little bit better than I could 20 years ago. So yeah, so here we are.
And what was your narrative on the show, or the narrative of your experience of being on the show and being a part of this production? Because I know this documentary, like the Netflix one, talks a lot about different ways in which some of the contestants felt exploited, or targeted for humiliation, or really traumatized by by being on the show. What
Yeah.
what was your experience filming it?
Well, I remember going into even just filming the first day into the documentary, and the executive producer had asked me, "Joanna, what was your experience?" And I had to really go into this repressed place in my mind, remembering what it was like to film in that kind of environment and the competitiveness. And I'm going to be honest with you, it was highly exploitative. The situation was sometimes unnerving, to be in a situation where you're sharing such tight quarters competitively, but then also, you're trying to navigate not being able to open windows, not being able to have a cell phone, not being able to listen to music. There was a lot of promises to us girls. One of the things that I was, when I had signed on, I had said, am I going to be able to go work out regularly? Am I going to be able to have access to food that's actually going to nourish? And, none of that, none of that was given to us. And I think it was a lot of, I think I was too quick to trust and I was very naive. And I think part of the exploitiveness, you realize that the ones in charge are making the money. And I think that's kind of like what I've taken from it in hindsight, that there wasn't anyone really looking out for us. I know there's been a lot of backlash about, the focus was Tyra, but everybody involved. I mean, they were trying to make a highly viewed show that would get garnish so many ratings. And it had nothing to do, also that era, I'm going to be honest, humiliating women was something that people tuned into and wanted to watch. So, they had their storylines and we had our living arrangements that were highly, difficult to navigate. We didn't have access to phone calls to family and friends to kind of have that support. They wouldn't really answer a lot of questions. We would go into holding zones. Even judging night was hours and hours and hours, and we weren't allowed to leave, use the restroom, wearing high heels and just being kind of in this fishbowl of subjective criticism. And just, yeah, it was a strange time for sure.
Yeah, there was a horrifying detail that I think one of the crew members gives in the series where he says basically that a girl was fainting every week shooting the show. That's how
Mhm.
little care was being given to their health, and how much people were being allowed to um, engage in the unhealthiest forms of eating in order to stay skinny on the show.
Yes. I mean, I don't know what the objective was. I think a big part of it was just the production and waiting for food to arrive and having these long days with very minimal sleep. And, even if you did go to sleep, there would be bright lights on, there would be things moving around. There was never like really quiet time to even kind of just, have that respite. But yeah, as far as the food, you didn't really get what you wanted to eat. It was kind of hit or miss. I think there was a couple times we were allowed to go to the supermarket and we would use our per diem, but that was very rare, and then or you'd be working and you'd finally get your chance to be a part of the photo shoot or whatever they were, having us do that day, and the food, magically disappeared or got cold or, I don't know. It was just there's a lot of strange things happening.
It's been a really interesting experience for me as a fan of the show who watched many cycles over the years. Um, to hear all these stories and sort of had my eyes open to what the experience is actually like for you and these contestants, because there's so much, I think, excusing and dismissal from the side of production, whether it's Tyra or the other producers, who say version of what you just previously said, which is this is just what it was like to do entertainment back then. Humiliating women was something that people watched and it was popular, and they were just in their eyes giving the people what they wanted. And I, as a viewer and a fan, I think is somewhat complicit in it as well, because I was thoroughly entertained by these things without ever thinking about it being problematic or disturbing. So I'm curious, especially now having heard from production and heard from producers like Tyra about how, well, that was just the time. That was just the way things were back then. How does that make you feel to hear that as sort of a dismissal for accountability?
Well, I feel like you have to be so careful when you say accountability in regards to so many people involved on the show because again, I wasn't behind the scenes in regards to who did what. And like I even just had a call with, Jay Manuel like 2 days ago and what his role was. And I think a lot of people get this distorted kind of how much control he even had. But I think it would be hard to really admit to what really went on and how they treated the girls because I feel like if people really got to see and break through the fantasy, I think it would really disturb the audience and I think it would really leave a bad stigma on the show and its legacy. And I think, it's not a comfortable time to be talking about, America's Next Top Model because again, it was a reality show, it was a competitive show, but I feel like the integrity of a lot of the executive producers, they kind of lost their touch with humanity and really humanizing the girls. And it just became so much of like this mechanic. And I think the narrative that I walk away, what I watched from that particular documentary was that the elephant in the room was that it was about the money, that it was about making money. It was about the next cycle, getting the advertisers. And when I was on the show, it was directed towards being a fashion model. We signed with a very big agency. It was only for a year and I had it for many years. And then it started becoming very commercialized, I think, to keep it going, to keep the audience going. So yeah, so I think there's a lot of I don't think they really want you to get that deep. I think they're trying to, distract in order to not have a serious conversation of what the elephant in the room is, which is they were making money, they were in charge, and we were, very naive and vulnerable. And, a lot of people said you could have quit any time, but we didn't want it. We didn't, we wanted that when we wanted the right to work. That's what I wanted, a right to work. So that's where we are.
It's I it's one of the things that I both love and sort of cringe about with the internet is how quickly people are able to seize on a cultural moment for comedy. Um, and sometimes it's in poor-ish taste. And I've noticed in these recent weeks, with all these documentaries coming out, people making TikToks and Instagram reels where they sort of make fun of the idea that the show would find whatever person's trauma is and turn that into a themed photo shoot. Like I was just talking to my friend about one where someone said, feeling when after you confess to Tyra that you have sleep apnea, and then they're posing with the CPAP machine, or
Yeah.
you tell Tyra you're afraid of cats, and all of a sudden you're posing with a whole bunch of cats. Were there any photo shoots that you had that sort of tested um, your comfort level, or that you thought was maybe trying to manipulate one of your fears or traumas?
Well, I feel that let's just be real. I do think that they used our stories and vulnerability to weaponize and to kind of watch us kind of squirm, as they say. Um, there were going back, there was a couple shoots that made me highly uncomfortable. One was the body paint and walking around naked with male models. And, I was uncomfortable with how much scrutiny I was already receiving about my body, and then to be having to walk around naked in a room full of not only production, but then fashion photographers, styling. Like it just was something that it was difficult. It was challenging for me. Another shoot I thought was absolutely ridiculous was the underwater shoot. Um, I was like, "What are we doing here?" I'm a Florida girl, but my goodness. And the other thing, which I absolutely loved, you know what my friend says, have you still gotten your residual check from Tyra's Shake Your Booty? No, I have not. That was, I just,
What a
I just,
moment in time that was.
right? You know, now you seeing that like people are tuning in on YouTube and rewatching it. That was, I literally like cringe anytime I think if someone mentions it. And I do get teased by one of my closest friends. She's got a great sense of humor. She's like, she'll like play the song or like stop. But
I mean, it's pretty iconic, to be honest.
it is. But I fell down and I fell and I was in these crazy platforms and I couldn't keep up with it, you know?
I'm curious to hear about what your experience was actually winning the show. What you remember from, hearing your name called and seeing your face on, your headshot, and then what the experience was like in the weeks and months after for you.
Wow. So yeah, we had, I guess it was the final days in Milan and we were really tired and there was a lot going on, a lot behind the scenes that I didn't even know. And then I'm still kind of unpacking. But it was exciting. It was really exciting to see, that I had won the winning shot. And then, we pack up, we go home, and I was home for 6 months, still being a nanny, and still working as a nanny. And we'd have very thinly veiled conversations about what was going to happen next. And I'll be honest, my experience after the win, which I never spoke about, I feel was very harsh in regards to what was expected of me from the win. And one of my stories is I get into the economics of what it was to be one of the first winners of America's Next Top Model. And I'm not going into just signing with an amazing agency, and having to rebuild my portfolio, but also I was in charge of paying for my looks to promote the show. I was owned by Tyra for 1 year. I wasn't able to accept certain jobs because I was on hold by Tyra. And I felt like I was the jockey for our season because it was the most highly viewed, most celebrated, and I believe it positioned her to turn it into a world-renowned franchise. And, to not even have a telephone conversation with Tyra to be like, hey, or some mentorship. I was going in debt tens of thousands of dollars within the first few months of Top Model, having to just show up, having to look the part. And it's still navigating, in such an elite and established modeling agency and how they were going to manage me. And, I think there's a clip that has resurfaced from Entertainment Tonight where Tyra said that she was going to take care of press looks and manage the girl. That never happened. And I never complained about it. So when people say, oh, now these winners are coming out, they're so negative. No, we're coming out with our experience of what actually happened. And just because we're talking about the truth of an experience, why does it have to be negative? What if it's just factual? What if it's just, what if we're just laying the foundation to say, let's cut through the fantasy and let's show you what it really was like. And also, my season when I won, they were wanting to cast fashion models, so I had to be 5'11". I had to wear certain high heels. Every time I had to step out, I had to look the part, and it kept incurring more and more cost. And I was getting billed, and then going to the red carpet and seeing Tyra, and then wondering why I had to afford the look, the hair, the makeup, why I had to afford the car service. At that time, there could have been a little bit more, I want to say, panache in handling. I felt like it was they didn't handle it with integrity. I felt it was really ill mannered, and I felt discarded.
And I think one of the reasons why people are so interested in hearing that story is because there is this idea, or there was this idea for so long, that it must be so glamorous and thrilling and just like floating on cloud nine to be crowned America's Next Top Model. Like, what a life you must be living, so much glamour and fashion and all that kind of stuff. So hearing the truth of it, I think, is really surprising to people.
Well, I hope it is, and I hope I just, I think some of the other winners have come out, and everybody has their own testimony, but I'm sharing mine, and I also had a lot of pressure on myself to kind of carry, I want to say, the promoting of the show and still trying to navigate a career because it was a double-edged sword coming off of that show. You had some incredible events, celebratory, you know, I was invited left and right to every single event, A-list event that you could think of. And I was like, but I have to work. and pivoting and growing in journalism and fashion journalism, and having E Network at the time invest in me. I had the show The Look for Less, and I did a lot of fashion corresponding that most of the girls, they kind of brush over as far as when they look at our careers. And I was so into fashion and the history of fashion, and I really felt my credibility was that I love fashion since I was a little girl. I still do. All my books, my subscriptions to multiple, you know, Vogues from all over the world since I was a young girl.
One of the things that I think blew people's minds about the Netflix documentary is the way that it ends, which is Tyra announcing the show coming back for another cycle after all these years. And I'm curious what your thoughts on the show coming back and what it might even be like in a time where now all of these scandals and controversies and problematic photo shoots and all these things are now out on the surface. People are talking about them. We know
Mhm.
about them. What do you what do you think that show could be like now knowing what we do know and hoping that it won't be the same way again?
Right. Well, I feel, we have to take into consideration a big chunk of what is social media. And I don't know what is going to happen in regards to a season 25. What I would say for any girls signing up or boys to just, really to just like I said in the beginning of my interview, remember it's the ones in charge that are making the money. And don't go in so hopeful with your vulnerabilities and naivety of what you're trying to get with your dreams. I think another thing is let's go behind the integrity of what the title of the show is, creating a top model. And what is it to create a top model in this year of 2026? And the scope, and what goes into that? Who's going to manage that winner? Who is going to stand behind the winner and create the integrity of the branding? And I don't mean just pivot into like doing another reality show or going on a kind of celebrity approach. But to be a top model, I mean, you do kind of now have to have somewhat of a celebrity side, but you still have to be a top model. You have to dress, train, skin, discipline. And, one of my favorite books is Eileen Ford's memoir, and the amount of integrity she had and how she stood behind her girls and how she disciplined them, and she really pioneered for their careers, and she made sure that she fought for the best rates, and she wanted to see them working. She didn't just say, "Oh, well, you're signed now, it's on you." That's not how business works. So, I don't foresee a 25th cycle of America's Next Top Model. I think it would completely have to change the title, the whole story. I don't know. I mean, what would be a benefit to have that?
And I have the hardest time thinking about what judging would be like on the show. It's really alarming to watch these documentaries and be reminded of the ways in which Janice Dickinson and Miss J and Tyra herself were talking about these contestants, talking about their bodies in a really vile way that, again, look, I'm complicit in. I chuckled and giggled at the time, but now watching it
Yeah.
back, it's horrifying. And I don't know how in 2026 you have a judging panel whose job is to critique women's looks and did not veer into that really upsetting territory again.
Well, it is upsetting. And also, we're looking at Tyra Banks, who has struggled with body image issues since she, after a certain time. And, to have somebody struggling with that, but then critiquing us is kind of just, it's sad because I feel like there could have been more real conversations in regard to a healthy relationship with our bodies. Because I do think there's a lot of successful top models that have healthy relationships, but it's like, how do you navigate that kind of topic when you're struggling as an executive producer in Tyra's shoes, and then you're essentially mirroring what you're dealing with and projecting it onto other people. I mean, it's a pretty complicated web.
Yeah. Well, I've been really enjoying this conversation. And there's one last thing I wanted to ask you about, which is you can see the words obsessed behind me everywhere. We're called the Obsessive Podcast. And I always just like to ask the people I'm talking to, what are you obsessed with right now? What TV shows or movies or celebrity that you can't get enough of? Like, what are you obsessed with?
I love mafioso movies. I'm obsessed with like always rewatching movies like Casino, The Sopranos, I'm obsessed with staying up late and just watching those movies and kind of like just that old school like 90s playlists and shows. I kind of gravitate towards that. It's such a great time to be alive.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this has been so much fun. I'm really grateful that you've been so honest and candid about your experience. I think it's really going to help a lot of people to hear that. So I just really appreciate that about you.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I appreciate you.
All right. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Thank you to Kevin Fallon for his great interview with Yoanna. I hope you really enjoyed that. And please let us know what you thought of the episode in the comments on YouTube. You can subscribe to our YouTube at the Obsessed channel and let us know what you think about the show. Who do you think had it the hardest on America's Next Top Model? We want to hear your feedback. And also, please subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts, on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and let us know what you think there as well. Thank you so much to our producers, Devin Rogerino and Rachel Passer, and we'll be back with an all-new episode of Obsessed the Podcast very soon.